Tonight on All In.
The district attorney has the documentation in order to validate every single statement that I've made.
The disgraced former president predicts his own indictment as the grand jury convenes and Team Trump makes a final push to persuade jurors.
I could see certainly a few of them were doing what you're doing right now, shaking your head up and down.
Tonight, as protective barricades go up in New York, what we know about what's coming and when. Plus, the other major developments in Georgia and D.C., the posturing of Trump allies in high office, and the ones battling him for a nomination.
I don't know what goes into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair.
Tonight, George Conway, Danya Perry, Congressman Adam Schiff, Michael Steele, Mona Charen, and John Meacham on what could be history in the making. And All In starts right now. Good evening. I'm Chris Hayes. Well, the country is bracing for what could be an imminent indictment of Donald Trump in Manhattan. There are reports it could be handed down as early as today, although as far as we know, that has not happened. Over the weekend, the ex-president took to social media to say in all caps he would be arrested on Tuesday, though he is the only source of that information. So, grain of salt, I guess. This afternoon, the grand jury heard from a Trump ally named Robert Costello, that individual who tried to discredit Michael Cohen, who is, of course, the key witness in the Manhattan district attorney's case. It seems plausible an indictment could come after the grand jury meets again on Wednesday. And, of course, it's possible there will be no indictment at all. All eyes are on the grand jury and on the ex-president. Trump has been on social media for the past few days using his knockoff Twitter platform to lash out at just about everyone from Michael Cohen to Ron DeSantis. But he has saved the most vitriol for Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who the ex-president insists is somehow, quote, racist in reverse for daring to investigate his misdeeds. In language echoing his incitement ahead of January 6th, Trump also used social media to demand his supporters, quote, protest, take our nation back, in all caps. Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, even the head of the MAGA Troll Caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, both essentially told Trump to dial it down a notch before he incites yet another deadly mob. And law enforcement is taking the threat of politically motivated violence very seriously. There have been reports of heightened security at the U.S. Capitol. Metal barriers have been placed near the Manhattan courthouse as well as Trump Tower. And in an email to staff, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg wrote, quote, we do not tolerate attempts to intimidate our office or threaten the rule of law in New York. At today's protest, put on by New York young Republicans and hyped up by the MAGA crowd, there were far more reporters present than actual Trump-defending protesters. Hopefully, I gotta say, things stay that way, right? Obviously, the best-case scenario would be for Trump's reporters to remain civil and peaceful, especially considering this might not be the only time he's indicted. And right now, as I'm speaking to you, Trump's lawyers are working to discredit another case that's been built against him. They're in Georgia trying to block a grand jury report into his efforts to pressure local officials into overturning the election. They're also trying to force District Attorney Fani Willis, who ran that grand jury investigation, to recuse herself over bogus claims of political bias. Now, indictments in that case are also expected soon. If Donald Trump sees his day in court, he's going to need a better defense than the same tired claims of political witch hunt. Joining me now, Jonathan Dienst, Chief Justice Contributor for NBC News, Chief Investigative Reporter for WMNC in New York. He has been reporting on this all day. Jonathan, what is the latest?
The latest is the grand jury ended its work today. We have no news out of the DA's office or the grand jury. It also meets on Wednesdays, so the expectation is that we may learn more then. We're told from numerous officials that we should expect nothing tomorrow. So Tuesday is expected to be a quiet day here in New York on the DA grand jury front, and that we should expect to perhaps learn more on Wednesday. That is the next scheduled date for that grand jury. That attorney, Robert Costello, who was put in front of that grand jury as a Trump defender, if you will, ended his testimony sometime after 4 o'clock, around 4:30. He then came out and spoke to the press and basically outlined all the reasons why he says he told the grand jury that Michael Cohen's story cannot be trusted, cannot be believed. and that ended late in the day. So the presumption is that this grand jury ended its work for the day and could be back on Wednesday. Again, a caution, grand jury operates in secret, so we're stumbling around in the dark a bit looking for the light switch, but that's the best information we have based on the tick-tock of today's events and speaking with numerous sources familiar with what is going on in Lower Manhattan.
That's very, very useful. You've also been reporting on preparations around this. Obviously, it's a big deal for the Secret Service, for the NYPD, for all sorts of folks in various jobs in security to make sure all this goes smoothly and efficiently and calmly. What's the latest on how they're preparing for that?
Okay, so they've had numerous meetings, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, the court officers, the FBI, the NYPD, the Secret Service. They've all had meetings about how to move forward if this indictment gets handed up. The best state that has been talked about for several days now, dating to last week and continuing through this evening, is that Wednesday could be a day that we learn much more about a decision or a progress in this investigation. So that is the time frame. But in the meantime, because of all of the back and forth political rhetoric that we've heard and some of the planned demonstrations, there's another demonstration called for tomorrow to march from Trump Tower down to the Manhattan DA's office. There's another Long Island protest being planned with a caravan of vehicles, pro-Trump supporters to drive from Long Island into New York, honking horns, waving flags, that sort of thing. So this is the sort of build-up to whatever final decision is made by the Manhattan DA's office. So security measures being in place, obviously the NYPD and the FBI and the Secret Service, keeping track of social media for any possible threats. But so far, any protests have been small and peaceful.
All right, Jonathan Dienst, thank you, as always, for sharing that with us tonight. I want to go to George Conway, prominent conservative attorney and a former Republican, Danya Perry, who served as Deputy Attorney General for the state of New York, as well as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and both join me right now. Danya, let me start with you just on kind of how we expect this to unspool. You heard Jonathan's reporting. We know the grand jury met today. We know that they took testimony from Mr. Costello. There was some sense that perhaps they would vote out an indictment today. It appears right now, we don't know definitively, that did not happen today. They're going to reconvene on Wednesday. How do you expect that to go, just timeline-wise, what we're looking for?
So, yeah, that was the last step in this process. And former President Trump was extended more courtesies than is often the case. So he was allowed to put in a defense witness, and the grand jury could have requested more information, and the district attorney's office could have provided Michael Cohen as a rebuttal witness, but chose not to. And sometimes reading juries or grand juries is like reading tea leaves. But here, I think we can safely read into that they did not buy Costello's evidence or information, and that they're ready to proceed. So I would agree with Jonathan that all signs point to an indictment likely handed down on Wednesday. And the rest depends upon working out the logistics with the security detail, with law enforcement, and with former President Trump's team as to whether and when he will self-surrender. And if they can work out those logistics, it will happen, I believe, just as quickly as those logistics are arranged.
To talk more about that in terms of self-surrender, like what is the timeline there? Would he travel up to New York for that? I assume he would have to.
Yeah, he would have to do that. And that, again, is another courtesy that appears to be extended to him. And that's not really unusual when you have a first-time defendant, a white-collar defendant, a high-profile defendant, one who does not present a flight risk. They will be offered that courtesy. And so he would be given a date and time to surrender to law enforcement, and he would have to get himself here, bring his security detail with him, and then go through the process just like any other defendant. He'll be printed, he'll be photographed, he'll be processed, and he will appear in front of a judge and be arraigned.
George, obviously, this is not the first prominent politician to face this kind of thing. Sitting Senator Menendez in New Jersey went through this. He was subsequently acquitted of the crime. So this is something that happens occasionally. Are you confident, having a sense of the man's psychology as you do, that he will actually do this by the book and self-surrender and just get it over with?
I'm not confident of that at all. I think anything is possible with this guy. I think he could decide to drag it out to create more controversy. I mean, he's capable. I mean, this is the man who was going to refuse to leave the White House 2 years ago. So I don't think we will be able to know what he's going to do until he actually does it.
Yeah, I saw a quote from one of his lawyers who said something to the lines of the effect of there won't be a standoff in Mar-a-Lago, which it never occurred to me that was possible. And as soon as he said that, I thought to myself, oh, that makes me think there might be a standoff in Mar-a-Lago. It reminded me a little bit of the quotes that people around Trump were giving in the run-up to January 6th, assuring everyone constantly, he'll go, he'll go, he'll go. He just has to work through this. To your point there, given the record before, given what he did on the classified documents, when there's a fork in the road between complying or pressing the envelope, it seems like he likes to push the envelope, and this is another such fork in the road, George.
Yeah, and that's quite possible. But then if he does that, then he gets the perp walk that I should think he doesn't want, but maybe he does want that. Maybe he does want a perp walk in order to inflame his supporters. You just cannot predict the psychology on this. He will go back and forth, and we will see what he does when he does it.
Danya, given everything you know and given the sort of position that everyone's in, including meetings with various, institutions and the Secret Service and the NYPD, I mean, is it possible there's no indictment? I mean, is it possible that we're missing something here, or this is overdetermined and it turns out this is not what it appears?
Anything is possible. It seems highly, highly likely. There is a grand jury of 23 New Yorkers. New Yorkers, famously find cause for disagreement all the time, but we just need a quorum of them to agree to indict, and an indictment is not particularly difficult to obtain for prosecutors. Costello had some criticism that they didn't want to hear things and that the prosecution had only presented a one-side story. Well, that's a prosecution. They get to do that. And so that is what they did in presenting evidence to the grand jury. And so that is why it's so unusual for a grand jury to not hand up a true bill. In other words, to not indict. So given the sequence of events here and the fact that it appears to have played out, that the defense witness has already testified and that the prosecution has foregone calling a rebuttal witness, it does appear that it's all wrapped up and that the grand jury will vote on Wednesday. Again, there's always a possibility. I've seen it maybe once or twice in my 20-something year career where a grand jury declines to indict. In that case, sometimes if the prosecution believes that that's the direction the grand jury is going to go, they can pause and they can see if there's additional information that the grand jury needs. But based on the fact that the grand jury didn't even want to hear from Michael Cohen, I think it's unlikely that they will decline to indict here.
George, over the weekend, that one sort of post by the ex-president about take our country back, you should protest, I think it had a lot of people feeling, kind of reverberations, echoes of January 6th, the will be wild instruction to his followers. You've seen Kevin McCarthy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, others tamping down that idea. And I just wonder what your read on that response from Republican leaders, that they clearly are freaked out and don't think it's a good idea to have Donald Trump calling people out in the streets. Were you surprised by that reaction?
No, I think they should be terrified at what Donald Trump could bring about. I mean, he may not get a big crowd this week if he's brought to justice in Foley Square there, but he's going to be pounding on this for months. The way he pounded on his fake election lies for months, and that has an effect. We don't know, and this is the first shoe to drop. We're going to have more cases. We're going to have the one in Georgia. We're probably going to have a federal case or two. And it's really going to be a long, long haul where Trump is going to be running a campaign, not just for the presidency, more than anything, it's going to be a campaign against the rule of law, against these prosecutors, challenging and claiming that this is all a giant George Soros fix, and the Joe Biden and other put everybody up to do this when it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, not only that, the stakes individually, personally, for this man who's 77 years old, I think, will be, staying out of incarceration, which will clearly be, really puts a fine point on it. George Conway and Danya Perry, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Coming up, the response so far to Donald Trump's call to action, plus the man who led the ex-president's first impeachment on why a Trump indictment is important for the rule of law in America. Next.
These days, the news never stops. The morning's headlines change by afternoon, and by the end of the day, it's all totally different. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. I get it. I know that it can be hard to keep up. So let's get started together and go from there.
Hey, I'm Hallie Jackson, and we have a ton going on tonight. Here's the deal.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 p.m. Eastern on NBC News Now.
Hi, I'm Tom Llamas, and for me, the news is so much more than a headline. It informs, it inspires, and it still matters. To cover it, you have to be in it. We'll take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. In primetime and streaming live, it's your news playlist. Join me for Top Story, weeknights at 7 Eastern on NBC News Now.
After Donald Trump urged users on his off-brand Twitter to stage protests in Manhattan this week, claiming he would be arrested on Tuesday, the NYPD responded, setting up barriers, preparing for the possibility of a large crowd. NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins has been tracking the response to Trump from the dark corners of the internet. He joins me live tonight. Ben, what have you found?
So I was at that protest today that was supposed to happen, put on by the New York Young Republicans Club. I would say maybe 5 to 1, 10 to 1 reporters to actual people there. As you can see, it was kind of ridiculous. But there were some holdovers from the day before. There was a drag queen story hour protest from the day before, put on by the Proud Boys. Some of those people were at this exact rally. So that's what we're seeing now is people who are afraid. All these people are very spooked by the feds. They think that this is all a honeypot by the feds. So they will not show up to protest in public on behalf of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I've read some reporting from you and others about that sense. And obviously, post January 6th, there's been 1,000 arrests and cases brought by the federal government. It does seem, at a basic level, a kind of 1 + 1 = 2 deterrent effect manifesting itself in the online activity of the kinds of people who would be disposed to this sort of thing. Is that what you're seeing as you cover this?
Chris, that's exactly what I'm seeing right now. In fact, it hasn't really stopped all of the sort of big talk in these forums. All the people calling for the assassinations of political leaders, talking about going after Alvin Bragg and all of this stuff. So you will see the same talk, but the actual action in real life just isn't there for the organization anymore. And I also want to say, maybe they got bit in the butt here a little bit by the years of scammy email organizing to even find out where this protest was happening. You had to sign up for an email list for the New York Young Republicans Club, and people just weren't doing it. So by the time the actual protest came around, there were 24 people there in MAGA hats and about 200 reporters.
All right, Ben Collins, who keeps tabs on all of this for us. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. Congressman Adam Schiff served on the January 6th committee. He was the lead manager in the first impeachment of Donald Trump, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, also a candidate for Senate in California, and he joins me now. Congressman, first, just your response, how you're thinking about what seems likelihood that a former president of the United States will be indicted by the Manhattan District Attorney.
Well, if the grand jury in Manhattan has found probable cause that Donald Trump committed a crime and prosecutors believe they can prove that, he should be indicted. It would be far more dangerous, I think, to the country to essentially immunize presidents and former presidents from harm, saying that it's too controversial or be too divisive. We went through 4 years when he was the president of the United States, in which the Justice Department took the position, which is flawed as a constitutional matter, that you can't prosecute a sitting president. You can prosecute a sitting president, even if you were to defer the trial until after they leave office. But if they're going to take that position, you can't then take the position, well, you also can't prosecute former presidents, because that's immunity. The founders would have never subscribed to that. And what's more, if we've seen anything with Donald Trump, it is that whenever he's not held accountable, it leads to worse and worse forms of abuse of power. So if they have the evidence, they need to go forward, and they need to apply the law equally to everyone.
Your colleagues in the House Republican caucus have decried this as politically motivated, as essentially a kind of retributive act, as an attempt to put their thumb on the scale of the 2024 election. Do you have any concerns about the political fallout about this, about making Donald Trump more of a martyr, about boosting his electoral chances?
I have a greater concern about letting him off, that is, not holding him accountable for potentially criminal conduct. In an ideal world, the most serious charges would have been brought first, and they would have been brought by the Justice Department. And I have, a lot of concerns about how the Justice Department has moved so slowly on those most serious of charges related to his efforts to overturn the election and the violence on January 6th.
Yeah.
But I am also concerned not with as much with what's going on in New York as what's going on in the Congress now, with Chairman Jim Jordan on the committee where I sit, essentially acting as defense counsel for Donald Trump, demanding discovery from the Manhattan DA's office, threatening potentially, I think implicitly, the use of subpoenas. So this is a defense counsel that can actually subpoena records from a prosecutor. This is what we've seen before of Jim Jordan, of Kevin McCarthy. That is, they step into the role of criminal defense counsel for Donald Trump. They're doing it again. And that, to me, is the more grave danger of the rule of law, the kind of interference by Congress.
Yeah, I saw Jim Jordan's comments today and a few other Republicans. I believe there's a letter I don't know if it's been posted or circulating, but whether they've written it down or not, they seem to intend to use their federal oversight abilities, and obviously they have that as given by the Article 1 of the Constitution, to conduct oversight of the district attorney in New York. And it just seems to me as a little bit of a strange thing to do, just constitutionally speaking. It's not really in their purview.
No, it isn't. And you can see they did issue a letter, how just contorted it is. The letter sort of is premised on what federal dollars might be used to help state prosecutors, prosecute crime in their districts. It's clearly just trying to find some nexus they can use to interfere with the prosecution of their party's leader. It's as simple as that. It is using the Trump playbook once again, and that is when Trump gets into criminal trouble or abuses his office, they try to investigate the investigators. They try to discredit the investigation. And this is what they're going to do. It's what Donald Trump's going to do. It's the same old playbook. And the cost to the country is real. It is going to be diminished confidence in our institutions and the rule of law. That's part of the autocratic playbook. It's all a witch hunt. It's all a hoax if you're going after their party's leader.
Let me follow up on something you just said, because I think it's in line with something that I share and have articulated on this show. In my humble opinion, the greatest sin of Donald Trump, whether it's technically a crime or not, is his attempt to undo the American Republic in the basic mechanisms of self-representation, the peaceful transfer of power, the first violent transfer of power since arguably Fort Sumter. I'd like you to just say a little more about what you said about the Justice Department, because it does strike me as a little strange, the sort of mismatch between the gravity of what is alleged here, if in fact he's indicted, and the gravity of what, frankly, we all saw him do, and then the January 6th committee exposed vis-a-vis what happened in January of 2020.
Well, look, violating campaign finance laws, engaging in a conspiracy to do so, something the Justice Department said Michael Cohen had to go to jail for because he was coordinated and directed in a scheme by individual number one, otherwise known as Donald Trump, is serious. And certainly if the guy who is coordinated and directed needs to go to jail, then the guy who did the coordinating and directing should go to jail. But the far more serious charges in terms of the nation are this effort to overturn the election, the effort to pressure state legislators, the effort to pressure the vice president, the incitement of a violent attack on the Capitol. That is far more significant. And it does beg the question, why in that most serious of offenses has the Justice Department taken so very long? I would agree with you that among the most destructive things of the last administration was this, this attack on our institutions and the transfer of power. But even more broadly, this relentless assault on the truth, this assault on fact was also so corrosive, and it continues. Pushing this George Soros conspiracy theory, starting with the premise that if their party leader is prosecuted by anyone, it has to be illegitimate. This attack on essentially truth and fact is also so destructive because we don't have a shared experience as Americans. Then how are we supposed to make policy decisions going forward? It just pushes us into political camps. And so I think that has also been super destructive, and you can see it reflected in both the vilification of Anthony Fauci, this person who symbolizes the factual inquiry and science and truth, and the election of George Santos, the embodiment of a party whose essentially ethic is that truth is for losers and suckers.
Congressman Adam Schiff of California, thank you for your time tonight, sir. Appreciate it. Still to come as Republicans fall over themselves trying to defend the dear leader. Donald Trump's chief Republican rival seizes the opportunity to take a shot at Trump. Next. As we await a possible criminal indictment of Donald Trump, the ex-president's supporters are rushing to his defense. There are a few common themes are hammering into all the excuses for why Trump should not be prosecuted for paying hush money to an adult film actress. According to the MAGA mouthpieces, the Manhattan District Attorney in charge of the investigation is a radical partisan funded by liberal billionaire George Soros, who should be focusing on real crime in New York.
I'm taken aback at the idea of indicting a former president of the United States. At a time when there's a crime wave in New York City, that the fact that the Manhattan DA thinks that indicting President Trump is his top priority, I think, just tells you everything you need to know about the radical left in this country.
It should be equal justice in America. And stop going after people because you have political differences. It goes directly against everything that this Manhattan DA has professed. He brags about lowering felonies to misdemeanors and not prosecuting. We've watched crime in New York where people are afraid to walk the streets.
The Manhattan District Attorney is a Soros-funded prosecutor. And so he, like other Soros-funded prosecutors, they weaponize their office to impose a political agenda on society at the expense of the rule of law and public safety. He has downgraded over 50% of the felonies to misdemeanors. He says he doesn't want to even have jail time for the vast, vast majority of crimes.
Now, to be clear, crime in New York City is down. It's down more than 5% overall year over year. Shootings are down nearly 15%. Homicides in New York City year over year are down nearly 30%. Under Alvin Bragg, among other criminal legal officials in the city. Of course, none of that matters because they're not really talking about the facts. They're not talking about the real human beings that live in New York City. Mike Pence, Kevin McCarthy, Ron DeSantis. It's all just an abstraction. Though the man Trump calls Meatball Ron did make sure to reiterate again what this all is about for his likely opponent for the 2024 Republican nomination.
And so you're talking about this situation with, and look, I don't know what goes into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair. I can't speak to that.
Donald Trump was less than amused than that crowd, responding to the dig from DeSantis with this, quote, Ron will probably find out about his sometime in the future when he's unfairly and illegally attacked by a woman or possibly a man with false accusations. But then the man who may soon become the first former president to face criminal charges came up with a better crack. He deleted the first draft, not because it was too far, but because he wanted to post this one, adding a reference to a rumor that DeSantis partied with underage girls while he was a teacher at a high school in Georgia. Trump, of course, has a huge incentive to get back into the White House. It's about the only surefire way to avoid criminal prosecution.
Hi, I'm Jen Psaki. I know from the years I've spent on campaign buses, in foreign capitals, and in the Oval Office that there is always more to a story under the surface. On my new show on MSNBC, we're going to bring you inside all of it, breaking down the truth about the things that matter and visiting with some of the most fascinating people in the news today. So I hope you join me every Sunday at noon Eastern on MSNBC for Inside with Jen Psaki.
Hi, I'm Jordan Rubin, former prosecutor and legal writer with MSNBC. These days, it seems every news story has a major legal angle to it, whether it's the multiple investigations into Donald Trump, decisions from the Supreme Court that impact our lives, or fallout from the January 6th committee's findings. That's why we've launched Deadline Legal Blog, an online extension of Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace, where I'll be breaking down the legal implications of the stories that are driving the news cycle. Read the latest at msnbc.com/deadlineblog.
Tonight, with the de facto leader of the party facing the possibility of imminent arrest, Republicans are rushing to Trump's defense, perhaps not surprisingly. I'm joined now by Michael Steele, former chairman of the RNC, and Mona Charen, policy editor of The Bulwark and host of the Beg to Differ podcast. Michael, first, just your reaction to what we've seen in the last 24 hours from Donald Trump sort of posting about, his imminent possible arrest or indictment, to the reactions of others in the field, to congressional Republicans. What do you make of it?
So, Chris, you know me. I'm gonna take a step back into the weekend, and I think Donald Trump has basically played everybody for the suckers he thinks they are. He floats this thing out with no corroborating evidence, certainly no indication from the DA's office that this Tuesday would be the day that they would come after him, if you will, despite the fact that the grand jury hadn't handed down an indictment. There was still at least one witness that they wanted to talk to. And yet everybody did the thing Donald Trump knew they would do, freak out. And the press went, oh, my God, this is a story. Let's lock it down. And the GOP fell into form, as we knew they would. They went into immediately into a defensive crouch. And that's the position that they're very familiar with when it comes to Donald Trump. And they will remain in that position throughout this whole thing. So nothing about this surprises me. When it happens, just look for more drama, more histrionics, and more defense. Mm-hmm. And we have to be sober in our covering and telling of this story because of not just what it means, but the implications for what it may mean going into 2024.
Mona, what do you think?
Well, I'm worried about this being the first indictment because, as you hinted earlier, of all the crimes and offenses that Trump has committed against this country, this is possibly among the most trivial. This is, about sex. This is about a payoff to a porn star. It's lewd. It's disgusting. It's low. It's lurid. But is it important in the grand scheme of things? Not nearly, compared with attempting to, disrupt our democracy, which is the great crime that Trump committed. And so I'm worried that this seems to come first. And if it does, as Michael said, all of the Republican gears will come into play, and everyone will say this is a political prosecution, and that by the way, it's very amusing that they are saying that that Kevin McCarthy's saying you shouldn't use politics to go after your political enemies. You shouldn't use the law to go after your political enemies. Meanwhile, Comer is sending, and Jim Jordan are sending a letter saying they're going to investigate the prosecutor. Yeah. In any event, so my worry, Chris, is that the gears will start going. People will get extremely excited. They'll start talking about the corruption of the judicial system, all for the sake of a trivial offense. And then when the big guns come next, when say Georgia indicts on attempting to disrupt the election, or when there's a federal prosecution for January 6th, some average voters are going to say, oh, there they go again. You know, they're going after Trump again. They keep going after Trump. And I'm afraid it may bring the law into disrepute. So I'm not happy about this being, if it comes to pass, I'm not happy about this being the first prosecution. If this had come third, no problem. But coming first, I'm very worried about it.
You know, I share exactly those worries and misgivings, particularly about the timing, and have been quite consistent, I think, on this show about what to me is the great sin of Donald Trump, right? The one that supervenes all others. That will be the first line, I suspect, probably, in the history books about him, unless he does something even worse after, to come, which let's hope we don't get there. The one thing I will say about this all, though, is, to Michael's point about sort of stepping back, I mean, I do think there's a little bit sometimes of a sort of post-2016, I think, a default assumption that all attention on Donald Trump benefits him and even negative attention does. And I think lots of conservatives, lots of Republicans believe that, lots of liberals, a lot of people viewing this program right now view that. And I don't think that's quite been borne out, which is to say, I think you could twist yourself into knots about what will or won't benefit Donald Trump. But I think... Michael Steele, I'll say this, and it was interesting that DeSantis took that shot today, right? If the news today were that Barack Obama were about to be possibly indicted for a hush money payment he made to an adult film actress while his wife was nursing his newborn child, first of all, it would be a breaking news story that would be wall to wall everywhere. And second of all, I don't think everyone would be, no one in that situation would be like, well, I think this is probably going to help Barack Obama, right? Like, it's only in the weird particularities of the Donald Trump universe that sort of like, well, how is this going to help him comes around? What do you know?
No, I think that is so well put. And it's true. I mean, in any other universe, this is not a good thing. There's nothing good about any of this narrative, right? I mean, particularly the way he expressed it. Yeah, I was, having a little side thing going on with the porn star while my wife was in labor. Not a good narrative for a politician or any person. But here's the rub. This is Donald Trump, and he's made an art out of this. And that's the bottom line. That's why I made the point I made at the beginning. Well, he knows, he just throws a little kernel out there. Oh, they're going to come to arrest me, and everybody freaks out from across the spectrum. Yeah. Why? Because of the drama and the narratives around it. And that's what he does. So we just need to be cognizant of that and be prepared for it. As to Mona's point, these other, legal issues come to bear. We're going to have to be diligent about contextualizing. No, this is more important than the Stormy Daniels thing.
Chris, the past...
Totally agree with that. Quickly, Mona, yes.
Yeah, in the past, Trump has been able to say, my grievances are your grievances to his base. Mm-hmm. It is not clear that will continue to work as people begin to factor in, well, do we want to have this kind of a candidate for president in 2024 with all of this baggage? It's really not clear how it's going to play out this time around.
Michael Steele and Mona Charen, thank you both very much. Still ahead, as we await the possibility of the first ever indictment of a former president, John Meacham joins me on this possibly history-making moment next. If Donald Trump is indicted this week, it will be the first time in U.S. history that a former president has been charged with a crime. Joining me now is Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer, presidential historian John Meacham. He also occasionally advises President Biden on historical matters and major speeches. John, in historical context, there's a strange juxtaposition between the specifics of the alleged crime here, if in fact he's indicted for it, the scale of some of the wrongdoing I think that Trump has done in terms of the scope of American history and the Constitution. How do you see this being remembered historically, its significance?
Well, I think we're at the beginning of this drama. One would hope we were toward the end of it, but I don't think we should count on that. One of the things you were just talking about it, the basic rules of American politics when Donald Trump is involved have been suspended. This is not 1974. This is not even 1998. This is just a different analogy-free world. And I think we have to keep that in mind. Some of the perennial forces that we've seen elsewhere in the world, autocratic forces, a tendency toward a cult of personality, those are the things that are sweeping the land here, which sounds rather grand, but it has the virtue of being true. What I think we have to understand and think about, both with the possible indictment in New York, the Georgia case, other New York case, and then the largest question, which is, what are we going to do when a huge chunk of one of the two major parties in the United States of America would still walk through fire for this guy, right? I mean, that's a central problem that no legal action can take care of. So of those two questions, I think it's incumbent on those of us who think that Trumpism is a virus that has to be confronted. It's incumbent on us to tell a different story, to tell the story that, in fact, the Constitution matters, the rule of law matters, the Declaration of Independence, when it's set out as our standard and we try to reach it, which is as old a standard in American life as Jefferson to Martin Luther King. If we don't have that story as a competing narrative, then we're going to be locked in this endless reality show. And the problem with it is it's not a show. We've seen that on January 6th. We've seen it again and again. And I believe that this generation, again, this is going to sound grand, but I believe firmly that this generation will be judged by our success or our failure at standing up to a totalitarian impulse in the United States.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been trying to work my way through is the rule of law, right, and the competing stories about its usage, right? So at one level, right, the Trump and his followers tell a story of American decline as represented in an abuse of the rule of law to bring down a political enemy, which is a thing that does happen in countries that are in democratic decline. I think others, myself included, see Trump as an example of a sort of permanent exception, right, to the rule of law, that he escapes from accountability precisely because of his either legal or political power. And those are the sort of two stories that are being told fundamentally here. I mean, ultimately, one of them, I think, will be the enduring one that is the story that we tell about this era.
Absolutely. Here's the thing about the right-wing narrative about this. Let the law unfold. Thomas Paine, before we were even a country, said the king is not the law in America, the law is the king. So there's an indictment. That's not the end of the story. There's going to be a judge, and there's going to be a jury, and there's going to be a trial. And let's let that process unfold. An indictment is not a necessary weaponization, and that's a matter of prosecutorial discretion. And I understand all the caveats about, this isn't the one to start with and all that. But you know what? Life doesn't work like that, as we've seen endlessly here. Obviously, the attempted theft of a presidential election and an insurrection outweigh this. But here's the thing. The rule of law moves slowly. It grinds slowly. And that's what we're just going to have to be patient, but we're going to have to be persistent in standing up to the broad effects of Trumpism.
All right, John Meacham, thank you so much for your time tonight.
That does it for All In. You can catch us every weeknight at 8 o'clock on MSNBC. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/allinwithchris.
The battle over a woman's right to choose, global economic challenges, the ongoing threat to democracy. When you sign up for the MSNBC Daily Newsletter, you're signing up to have a deeper understanding of today's biggest issues. Every morning you'll get insightful articles sent directly to your inbox, written by people you know and trust, like Hayes Brown and Mehdi Hassan, along with video highlights from your favorite MSNBC shows. Sign up for MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.